Anwen and I are joining you live on LinkedIn for our second in our series of 4 talks about leadership. And today we're going to be talking about what we've titled this is that a storm is coming. But what we actually want to talk about is the storm that's already here. And that is the environment that we find ourselves leading in. So we introduced ourselves last week on the live stream last week. So if you don't know who we are, please jump onto that one and have a listen. And we're going to go straight into it. Please ask, please ask questions all the way throughout. We will answer questions. Anwen's going to keep an eye on the chat, I think, for questions coming through. I'm going to be really transparent with everyone on this. I am learning a new skill set, which is live streaming. So Anwen has actually thrown the controls to me to do this. So if I look a little bit like a deer in headlights, that is why. So hopefully this will be good. Anwen, any comments before we start?
No, you go for it. We're away.
You're doing a great job, Zoe. Crack on. All right. Yes. And we've both got our tea today. So today we are going to talk about the topic of how we lead in this environment that we're in at the minute, how we lead in this storm. And we're going to talk very much about post-COVID. I'm going to really touch on before COVID, and then we're really going to go into post-COVID. And the point of this live stream today is to talk to you about how you can build up skills to lead now and in the future from what we see the environment being like now. So, oh my goodness, we're in 2024. So let's say 5, 6 years ago, you may have heard the term VUCA. Okay, so when we talk about VUCA, we're talking about the environment. We're talking about the environment, and we're talking about the worldwide environment, not just our work environment. Obviously, it has a knock-on effect. But when we talk about VUCA, we're talking about volatility in the world. We're talking about a lot of uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So that's the VUCA. But actually, what we found is post-COVID, there's a new paradigm coming in, which is BANI. And what I want to do at this point, before I go any further, I want to give a shout out to a company that I work with called Solution Cell. And Laura one of the ladies I work with, might be on this call, might be on this live as well. So if you are, Laura, good morning. So Solution Cell are an incredible company, and they work with companies to change behaviours. They're all about that behavioural science and changing behaviours. So you can Google them, you can go and find out more about them. But a couple of weeks ago, with the work I do with Solution Cell, we did a masterclass on leading in the volatile times. We are doing another masterclass with Solution Cell on the 20th of June. So if you do want to jump in on that, it's for senior leadership leading through volatile times. If you want to jump in, please just DM me after this and I'll put you in touch with Laura and the team at Solution Cell to get you signed up. So I'm going to take some of the pieces we talked about then and just really focus on that BANI environment. So when we talk about BANI now, post-COVID, because if we talk about post-COVID, but think about everything else that's happening in the world. Yes, we've got COVID, we've got wars, we've got climate change, the supercell storms we see, the droughts, the forest fires. There is so much going on in the world. And even though it seems connected, but also not connected, there's things going on that can really start to divert our attention in different ways. So when we talk about BANI, we're talking about a world that is very brittle. We're talking about a world that is anxious. We're talking about a very non-linear world. So things don't happen A, B, C, D, E. They might kind of go A to Z to X to C. So very much non-linear. And we're talking about a lot of incomprehensibility, is a big word, about what's going on next and actually what's happening in the world, because there is so much data. So I'm going to run through those briefly, and then Anwen and I are going to have a chat about what we can do as leaders to lead in this type of world. And this is not going to be a massively long live today. We just want to get the information out there so that you've got those kind of seeds, those nuggets that you can go and look at things a bit more. So first of all, let's talk about brittle. Example of this for COVID would be thinking about the health system or banks. Things that seemed very, very solid until overnight they just weren't. So there was a brittleness within how they were working. Okay. Talking about anxious. So anxious is, oh wow, how do I start with anxious? I've pretty much said it, haven't I? And all the stuff that we have, you even have to turn on the news these days, and I've just said to Anwen before we went live, I don't watch the news very often, but you turn on the news and there's a lot. There's just so much happening, and it all seems very doom and gloom. The stuff we report on these days is the negative side of the world, it would seem. So there's so much to deal with. So that can create a lot of anxiousness. First, for leaders, because people look to leadership to deal with things. But second of all, for the teams as well, because they don't know which way to turn. And then non-linear as well. Now, when I think about non-linear, I think about the chaos theory. And for those of you who don't know the chaos theory, I'm going to absolutely butcher this, I think. But it's something like, say, a butterfly flaps its wings in Australia and creates a tornado in Texas. But the point behind the chaos theory is that a small thing that happens in one place creates a huge effect somewhere else. So there's things in the world happening that a small thing can happen and create a massive effect, but they don't always seem like they're connected, and you don't realize they're connected. So if you don't know they're connected, how do you prepare for them? So we've got all that coming as well. And then incomprehensible, that is relating to the sheer amount of data we get on a day-to-day basis. As leaders, you are having data after data, and even if that data is created into a really pretty dashboard for you, or an Excel spreadsheet, or a Google Doc sheet thing, it's just so much. What do you prioritize? What do you look at? What does it actually mean? And I think we're so used to, as leaders, doing everything ourselves, or thinking we need to do everything ourselves. And this is one of the points that Anwen and I are going to talk about actually, I said it just before we went live, that I personally believe that leadership is a team sport. It's a team sport. We don't do leadership as an island on our own. We work with our teams as well. So, Anwen, unless you've got anything, I'm going to jump straight into B, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just before you do that, I think one of the ways of looking at this for me from a leadership perspective is this great opportunity here for thinking about how we do leading. This doesn't have to be looking at it going, oh my God, terrifying. What we can look at it as is, what does this mean for me and require of me as a leader, rather than just looking at it from being a challenging perspective. It's about shifting. And I think there's some really interesting research, quite a lot going on about how leaders, HR people see that their leaders are really overwhelmed, that there's too much going on, that they don't feel prepared enough for this type of changing world. When actually what we need to do is make sure that they're identifying the shift that they need to make. And it's not just about doing more, it's about doing different.
Yeah. And I know when we talk about anxious, I'm definitely going to mention the whole art of slowing down. Because as things start to come, the walls feel like they're closing in, our immediate reaction is to do more. It's to do things faster.
Absolutely.
And I don't know about you, if I do that, I'm glad you can't see my whiteboard, I just end up with lists and they just stay there and they just become, and then I look at them every single day and they become overwhelming. So it's the art of prioritization and actually reducing. Totally. Don't do more, do less. Absolutely. There you go. If you don't take anything from this live stream, take that.
Absolutely. I'm all for that. Do different. Do the right different.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about B. So we talked about B as being brittle. So the world being brittle. And actually, there are some things that seem very, very solid, such as, I was going to say the NHS then. Some things like healthcare, let's go for, or banks that seem solid. And then suddenly post-COVID, they weren't. Yeah, let's not use the NHS as an example again, especially not on a live stream. But let's talk about how we deal with that as leadership. And for me, and I don't know if you think the same, Anwen, it's very much that flexibility. Flexibility that then creates resilience. But how we are flexible in understanding our processes, doing deep dives into what our companies actually look like and organizations, looking at where our contingencies are and being flexible to flip between them as well. And I think one thing we see a lot since since COVID is flexible working. That would be one element of flexibility. Do we have things set up to work flexibly, so that if there was a flood in our office, heaven forbid, but a flood or something, or COVID as it was, a flood, we know that we've got that flexibility for people to work differently. That would be one of the examples I'd probably pull out from how we can become a more flexible leadership style.
Being adaptable. This is about how you're able to adapt, bring in that empathy and that compassion with your team, because people are going to be in different places at different points. And therefore, they need you as a leader to be able to support and respond into that space and be able to kind of take care of that in the right way. And I think that kind of resilience piece comes from being prepared to be adaptable as a leader and not have to have fixed plans, fixed approaches to things. And I know we'll probably pick up on some of this theme in a bit as well. That ability to adapt around what's in front of you rather than becoming overwhelmed by all the plans not going to plan. Well, there's a good chance that that's going to be happening a heck of a lot more.
Yeah. And I think that leads really nicely into the A, to the anxiousness, because I don't know if you've noticed with the leadership teams that you've worked with and the leaders you've worked with, there is a lot of anxiety around people not sure what's going on and not sure what these new, because there's been, I mean, obviously I work in change. I'm a change specialist and I teach change. So I always see it from a change point of view, that there is so much change going on and it's constant. It's never going away. And I always talk about leaders having those change skills and being able to actually lead people through change as being one of the biggest things you can do for yourself, is actually upskilling yourself and leading through change. But with this anxiousness, it is that empathy, isn't it? It's having the empathy, and it's not even just the compassion for others, it's having self-compassion as well, because we can be really hard on ourselves, thinking that we need to know everything. It's practicing mindfulness. And as I just said, it's that slowing down, actually taking that time to go, hang on a minute, what do I actually need to do today? What do my teams need to do? Where do they need my help? Instead of just going, there's my to-do list, let me go from A to Z and get it done. And I know we're going to talk about next week, in the live next week, we're going to talk about connective relationships. We're going to talk about building those relationships at work and how we build those teams. But just touching on that, I think this anxiousness is about how we can help as leaders is creating those cohesive teams at work. So kind of not just talking about it, about how important it is to, have teams bonding and gelling and being working together well, but actually putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and walking the talk and putting the time into team bonding and development, and actually saying, well, how do you work together? Because that's their support system as well. When you're not there as a leader and you've moved to do something else, they can support each other.
Yeah, that connectedness is so important. And I think the root of that, and this is what we'll get into next week, is the relationship is so important. Knowing your team, understanding your team. If you're talking about change and that kind of the impact of change fatigue is something we're all experiencing, whether it's in work or whether it's outside of work. And as a leader, you've got to be really conscious of the fact that where change fatigue is incredibly high in your organization, you're more likely to be losing those people. Whether it's because they're checking out because they just don't have the capacity to kind of take it on board, or whether they're actually physically checking out and moving elsewhere to see if they can kind of have a different space where they don't have to deal with that level of change fatigue. So being responsive and aware of where your team are in terms of their capacity, and therefore what that means for decision making that you need to make around actually what can and can't we do right now, is really, really important in this world, because there is a limit. There is a limit, and that wellness factor has a huge impact on our abilities to perform and to operate really well in our organizations. And that's what leaders need to tune into. This is about looking at what can I actually get done based on where my team are, and you can try and force people. It's gonna last only a period of time, that. So, good luck. And what's the impact of doing that? So having that ability to understand your team, understand where the business is, and kind of match those together so that you're able to manage that change fatigue effectively and positively is a hugely important area of focus.
Yeah, I talk about it all the time in change when I'm teaching change. We said change is constant, but things like, how do you communicate change? Do you leave it to the last minute because maybe you haven't got all the pieces of the jigsaw piece just yet? Or do you actually talk about it early so you can reduce that anxiety around the things that are coming up? Because like we said, it's constant. And actually, if you can anchor people into what's not going to change, or what the benefits they're going to see early are going to be, and we actually celebrate those milestones as we go through instead of wait until the end, then it can make a real difference as leaders lean through change to that levels of anxiety that people have, which then, like you were talking about with people with retention of employees, it can make a massive difference on reducing your turnover. And also, one thing that organizations, I think, sometimes forget about is the reputation that goes with it. So when people leave organizations, they have an opinion of the organization, and depending on why they're leaving, that's going to have a knock-on effect on your recruitment as well. So it all sits together really nicely in this kind of cyclical kind of way. Okay, so we've done B and we've done A. Let's move on to N. So N was very much about that non-linear world. So I talked about the chaos theory about sometimes when the consequences of an event or action can seem very, very disconnected, like they don't connect, but actually it's you can change a small thing over here and it makes a massive impact over there. And I suppose the question is, as leaders, how do we deal with that? I'm very much of the let's roll with the punches kind of feeling. But that's that flexibility again. It's that knowing that it's the being comfortable with being uncomfortable, isn't it? And actually knowing that it's going to happen and just not putting too much pressure on yourself and having that flexibility to go, okay, well, something's going to happen. I may not have any control over it, but also it's about looking at all the consequences and possibilities. So if you're going to do something in work, what could happen? I always like those spider diagrams, when you write on a whiteboard in the middle, you put all the changes and then you just put loads of things out to say what could happen. And then go and validate those thoughts. Go and ask people, go and ask your stakeholders, go and have, your one-on-one with your focus group, say, I think this is going to happen. And they might go, why would you think that? Or they might say, oh yeah, that's going to be even worse than you thought. But at least then you can actually do something about it.
Absolutely. I think this is such a behavioural importance here. There's such a behaviour for leaders to be considering here around how safe an environment have you created for your team, so when the chaos theory kicks in, that they feel safe still. Because sometimes all kinds of chaos can happen. But if we're in an environment where we know that it'll be okay and we'll work it through and the support's there and I know my back is looked after, that makes a huge difference. And I think this is where leaders need to go. The reality is we are going to have these scenarios that are non-linear and that we won't always have A, B, C, D, E lined up nicely. But actually, as a leader, I need to know that my team are going to be able to feel safe and ready to deal with that type of scenario. And that is about you as a leader in terms of have you created that space to feel like that. And it doesn't happen in the moment of the madness. It happens before. It happens in all those tiny little interactions, all those consistencies or inconsistencies of behaviour that create the space for whether somebody is going to feel safe in your team. And also that they're then psychologically safe to be able to come forward and go, this crazy that's just happened, this complete chaos that we weren't expecting. How do we now handle this as a team, and how do we work through the requirements for what we need to do here? And I think that's the bit that's so important for leaders to be mindful of. Yes, how you behave in the chaos is important. Of course it is. But it's more about how you've prepared yourself and your team before chaos happens. Do they feel able to handle chaos based on your behaviours and how you've led that team so far? So I think that's where that critical factor of being able to cope in that world as a leader is about being consistent, being there for your team in the right way so they know how you are going to respond, they know how you are going to support them in that type of scenario. And that behavioural piece, I think, for leaders is just absolutely key there. So
and I know you and I are talking about emotional intelligence later today in your group, and for me it was very much about how do you manage those emotions, how do you manage that behaviour, and how do you manage your own emotions as a leader, because everyone is watching. And you are, and I'm not going to go, I promise you, I'll try not to go into it now, but you are setting that emotional tone for your group, for your team.
Absolutely.
And they are picking up. And there's loads of things that happens with mirroring as well through we use it a lot on neuro-linguistic programming, so NLP, but the mirroring, what you're giving out is going to be mirrored back to you by others because they're absorbing it in. So yeah, I think really, really important, that behavioural side. It actually it leads me on to the I. So the last one we've got is incomprehensible. And really that's that one step up from ambiguity in the VUCA model that we had before. And for me, incomprehensible, how do we deal with it as leaders? For me, this is all about having a bit of humility and being very transparent and actually realizing you are not a superhero. you know, leadership, I keep saying, is a team sport. It's not all on you. Yes, you hold the responsibility, you hold the accountability, all those good things as a leader, but you don't have to do it all yourself. And I think the amount of data, I mean, if someone gave me a shed load of data and said, right, Zoe, sort this out, you know, make some priorities, would I be able to do it on my own? Probably, but would it take me a long time? Yeah. So actually, if I've got a team and I know someone in my team is really good at, you know, deciphering what these little numbers on a page are on a spreadsheet, I'm going to bring them in and say, look, can you give me a hand with this? Because it's about asking for help for me. This I is all about asking for help, using that diversity in the room, and actually using the skill sets that you employ people for. Because I don't know if you've seen this. Oh, no, I know you've seen this, Anwen. The number of times I see people are recruited in and you have to jump through 4 or 5 hoops to get recruited, but you come in and then you're just told to do this. Instead of what do you think? You know, how can you add to this? Because that's what we've employed you for. You're then given just like a cookie cutter and told to get on with it. Yeah. And we leaders, we're missing a trick. We are missing a trick here. Use your people, use those specialist skills. Gone are the days where leaders are expected to know everything.
And back to my point at the beginning, this is, for me, is where the opportunity is. This is the big opportunity. And this is something that I focus a lot on with the leaders that I work with who are making those transitions to bigger roles. You know, reflecting on it in terms of my own experience, I moved into a team where I was leading people that and areas of function that weren't my subject matter expert. You know, this wasn't something I was an expert in, but I was a leader for that function. And in a way, it's like, it's quite freeing to a certain extent. And I think this is sometimes the shift we don't help people make when they're moving within their subject matter expertise, to kind of really make that shift of, this now isn't for you to know all the detail of in the way that you need to, or to make those calls or decisions on. What you're there to do is to facilitate that happening in the right way and to enable people to feel confident to make those calls and have those decisions in a way that is useful for the business or the goals or wherever you're looking to achieve. And that, for me, is the opportunity with this type of thinking around the world. Is this is your opportunity to step back as a leader, to create the space for people who are experts in that space, to create that opportunity for people to try and figure out those ideas and those decisions, and to facilitate that in the right way. However, it's also your job then to look at when there's other stuff coming in from all kinds of different directions, is to try and help the team to solidify what the right decisions are and the right direction is. And I think that's where the opportunity is in terms of leading, is to really kind of be able to be okay with the fact that you aren't knowledgeable about everything and that you're not going to always know what's going on, but you're able to enable people to make the call and make those decisions. So I think it's a really interesting way of looking at the world.
I love that you've just made that clarification about the shift, going from when you move up to leadership, your job changes a lot. And I was just thinking about a time when I was in the military. I was in the Royal Air Force, and I used to work in air defence, and I would be the leader on shift. But I'd also be in my team would be a load of engineers who would know radars inside and out. Don't get me wrong, I used to teach radar theory, so I understand a radar, but they knew, you know, the nuts and bolts. If something's wrong, it's them I'm asking. I'm not doing it myself. But I was still there, responsible for their welfare and for their, you know, the direction that comes with leadership. So yeah, just I was giggling away to myself thinking, oh yeah, but I didn't know all about what they were doing specifically. It was very much, here's the objective that we're pushing towards, and they would use their specialist skills to get there. So I think it's really, really important actually understand that when you shift up to leadership, you have a different role. And I think that's where some people really start to struggle, because they suddenly think, oh my God, I've got even more on my plate because I'm now in a leadership role. And it's like, but some of the stuff you've kept on your plate, you don't need to keep on your plate. You need to kind of leave that with the specialists and realize you're moving up. It happens in the military quite a lot. And as we move up ranks in the military, the higher up in the ranks get, the broader you get. So you may be trained specifically in one area as you're coming up, but as you get into senior leadership, you'll work broadly, and you might work in like international relations and broader, because that's where they need your leadership skill sets, not into the actual specific day-to-days. And it's the same across industry, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Leadership is a skill. Yes, context and environment are important, and they're about kind of applying that skill. But realistically, get good at leading. World's your oyster.
Yeah, you can do it anywhere.
Choose where you want to be. Easier said than done, because we do have a historical view of the world where we like people to come from the same industry or the same background and all that kind of stuff. However, realistically, brilliant leaders are brilliant leaders. Create the...
But no, what you just said is spot on. Leadership is leadership, isn't it? And if you have that skill set, it's something you can transfer. You don't need to be, for example, be a leader in retail and think, well, I can now only be a leader in retail. No, you can move to different sectors because it's a skill set. And I think that's what you teach so well in Boost, your leadership program, is actually the skill set around it. And then you can have conversations about which environments you put it into. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. That's what leading is. And it's about getting good at the stuff. The stuff that you need to do, the behaviours, the mindsets, all that side of things. It's really important to do that. And so we haven't had any questions in or comments, but if you do have any questions or comments for us, please do pop them into the comments on the event page. We can always come back to them afterwards if we haven't got a chance to cover them off now, but now's a good time to go if you do want to ask us something live.
Because we're going to wrap this up very shortly. Great. All right. Well, like Anwen said, if you've got anything, please do let us know, or just DM us. If you want to DM us, we're both on LinkedIn. We're both pretty active on LinkedIn, so just DM us and we will try answer anything sort of around leadership and change. If you just want to pick our brains about examples, if you want to hear some of the juicy examples that we don't really want to put on a live stream, we might share those as well.